Okay, Year 12 Global Politics. In this video, we will be looking at the ethical debates related to people movement. And the ethical debates that you will be tested on are obligations to asylum seekers and other refugees versus national interests, including border security, the rights of refugees versus economic migrants, and the differing approaches regarding refugee settlement. So those are the three that you can be tested on. There are no other debates related to people movement, so please don't refer to another one. These are the only debates you'll be looking at. And the key skill here is to analyze. Doesn't necessarily mean you won't be asked about any other of the, any other skills. You may be asked to explain the ethical debate, but analyze is the task word here. And this basically means that you need to be able to discuss the two sides and why one side is realist, why is the other side a cosmopolitan, and show your example, and then with your example explain then again why that is a realist perspective and why that is a cosmopolitan perspective. So this is when, again, a real understanding of realism and cosmopolitanism is needed. Okay, so our first debate is the obligations to asylum seekers and other refugees versus national interests, including border security. So let's start with the cosmopolitan perspective. Obligations to asylum seekers and other refugees is the cosmopolitan point of view. So as you can see with the table here, I've kind of broken it up into, what cosmopolitan believes, what the perspective is. So I'm going to write P for perspective, E for your example, and then link, peel, to kind of help you kind of structure it here. So we've got the perspective, and the perspective of a cosmopolitan would say about this issue that states have an obligation to all human beings equally. We are one common humanity, so any refugee seeking asylum should be accepted by the state where the asylum is sought. That's what a cosmopolitan believes. And we have seen this in an example with Mare Nostrum. The Italian government in 2014, allowed themselves to pay $12 million a month. There was 32 Navy ships, helicopters, submarines, 140,000 lives were saved. This is a cosmopolitan approach because they are here allowing the asylum seekers to be protected, and then they didn't only stop by saving them at sea, but also allowing them when they came into Italy to be provided with medical treatment and food, and they were given the opportunity to claim asylum. So, they have here upheld their obligations to asylum seekers and the refugees here. So in terms of how does this actually link back to the debate and how does this link back to cosmopolitanism? Well, as Italy are providing medical treatment, food, legal aid, and are saving the lives of asylum seekers and refugees at sea, they are being cosmopolitan. They are fulfilling their obligations to all human beings here. So that is a cosmopolitan perspective. The other side is that you are more concerned about national interests, such as border security. So as we know, realists see the state as the most important global actor. It's not about individuals. It's not about the global community. It's about what is best for the state. And the state may prioritize their international or their national interests over obligations to refugees and asylum seekers. So a realist will prefer to exercise sovereignty and exercise state sovereignty over deciding their own external border policies, rather than looking at what their national security is. So, they'd rather be focusing on border security and national security than allowing everyone in. Okay, so that's probably more what it's focusing on. An example of this is with Scott Morrison. in Operation Sovereign Borders. We're talking about when he was foreign minister, and he said that this is the whole policy is the national interest is of border security, and it's to ensure that no illegal maritime arrivals come to Australia. And as part of this policy, it said that, the Australian government is committed to protecting Australia's border. So that directly links to this debate. It's about border security. It's about national security. We are prioritising our national interests above the international community. So, as Scott Morrison, as the foreign minister, the former immigration minister, is prioritising his national interests of border security over assisting asylum seekers and refugees. This is a realist approach. We are prioritising national interest over border security. So with our responses here, we need to make sure that we are, saying what the perspective believes on the debate. We need to have our example, and then we need to link it back. So need to show how this example is realist or cosmopolitan and how this fits into the broader debate. Okay, so that's the first ethical debate. We have here another ethical debate, and that is the rights of refugees versus economic migrants. So we'll start with the cosmopolitan approach here first. So in a cosmopolitan view of global politics, the world is a global community. Cosmopolitanism states that people applicable for permanent resettlement should include those who are economic migrants and asylum seekers who meet the global ethical standards. So, basically, if you are, if you are eligible for permanent resettlement, you are allowed. And we have seen this with Canada. Canada have following a cosmopolitan approach because they have accepted over 50,000 refugees in 2016, and it's cost them, $385 million, but they are allowing these refugees in. And it also fits back into this debate with economic migrants because they are allowing these refugees in, but then once they've come in, they engage in training, language training, they have access to jobs, which then allows them to be independent and not rely on government, resources and well-being. So this allows these people to have economic justice and cosmopolitan, and it kind of fits within cosmopolitan because we are allowing also economic migration. So there's a few things here. It's a cosmopolitan approach because we are allowing these people to have, their rights have been upheld. We are allowing these refugees in, but also they are allowing them then to be, economically independent. And so they end up contributing to society. And it does then link to that perspective of economic migration. On the other hand, we have a realist perspective, which is about economic migration. So from a realist perspective, a state doesn't have an obligation to outside parties, only to people who are their own citizens. But we have here, so we have also in the Refugee Convention, there's nothing in there about economic migration. So there's no obligation to accept economic migration and economic migrants. The only reason why you would accept an economic migrant is if they benefit the state's national interests. And this is where it's a realist perspective. So realism is about doing what's in the best interest of your state. And, you prioritize your national interests over your ethical obligations to the international community. And here we see with economic migrants that if the state accepts them, it's because they are going to benefit the state's national interests. In Australia, we have a migrant program, and that has allowed for close to 80,000 people come to Australia to fill skill shortages in the labour market. So this was between 2020 and 2021. So when borders were closed during the COVID pandemic, we had a skill shortage. So they decided to allow migrants in. These were people in areas of like engineering and IT, so where there was a shortage. So this is a realist perspective because we are allowing people in, economic migrants in, who are going to benefit our economy. It's all about our economic prosperity and, you know, increased productivity. So it's fulfilling Australia's national interests. So it is a realist approach. Okay, final ethical debate, and that is differing approaches regarding refugee resettlement. So you can probably start to see also a pattern here that on the left-hand side is generally the cosmopolitan approach, and the right-hand side, sorry, the left-hand side is a realist approach. So, and then sometimes it's a cosmopolitan approach on the other side. So as a differing interpretations, we have, from a cosmopolitan perspective, we have refugee resettlement. So basically here, in a cosmopolitan view of the world, we are a global community. So that means states believe that people applicable for permanent resettlement are refugees. So if you're a refugee, you should be allowed to resettle. We have spoken about this before in responses. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees has a resettlement program where refugees are transferred to states where they seek asylum, and, you know, a state may accept them, and then they will be able to resettle. So Australia, between 2018 and 2019, allowed 18,000 people to come into Australia to resettle. So this is taking a cosmopolitan approach because, you know, we are not thinking about border security, but we are working to resettle refugees, and, you know, we are fulfilling our obligations to human beings. So, you know, we here are not prioritizing border security, but are thinking about protecting the rights of refugees and are resettling these refugees. The other side is a realist perspective, and that is that we have strict, and one side of this could be strict quotas. So realist states will prefer to exercise state sovereignty by deciding their own refugee resettlement policies. Some states will have strict quotas and will only allow a limited number of refugees to be resettled. So in Japan, they have a very strict policy, and only 1 out of 250 applicants have been granted refugee status in 2019. And according to The Guardian in 2017, Japan only took in 20 refugees from over 20,000 applicants. So they have a very, very strict refugee policy here. This is a realist perspective because they are prioritizing their national interest or their self-interests of having a homogeneous society where, homogeneous society, where, you know, there's just only people that have the same geography, history. You know, they just want people that are Japanese to live in Japan. And so by having this strict policy, it does mean that they can't allow all people into their society. You know, it is a very strict policy. So as you can see again here, I've got the perspective, I've got the example, and I've got the link. So that should be how you should be structuring your answers as well. So that's it on the refugee examples and our debates. I hope that was helpful and that you basically could see how to structure your answers as well as linking it back to cosmopolitan and realism. Thank you for watching, and let me know if you've got any questions.